I want to talk about something you should always do before you move a tenant into your rental property. This is particularly for self-managed properties, but also for property managers. If you're thinking about moving in tenants to your clients' properties, it's called the rent talk. Having the rent talk. This is an idea I learned from a book a long time ago called Landlording on Autopilot by Mike Butler. And this is a really good book. It actually has a new edition with smartphones, and instead of the old edition I have, shows you how long I've been studying this stuff. But it's a lot of practical ideas about making your business more efficient as a landlord, building systems and using technology to automate things to make a better customer service for your tenant and also to make your life easier as a landlord. But one particular idea I used when I was self-managing all my properties. And now these days I have mainly third-party managers who manage our stuff, but we also self-manage a few properties. And I always like to do this rent talk. And this happens when your tenant is approved for a property. So they've been through the qualification process, you've approved them, and then before they move into the property. The temptation is, especially as it's gotten so easy to virtually sign documents like the lease documents, is to just do what I call send and sign. You just email it to them or you send them a link, they sign it, then you let them in. You give them the lockbox code. Okay, you can move into the house. That's the most efficient way to do it. Maybe for your time, you'd think that'd be the easiest way, but you're missing a really important opportunity to make a human connection with your tenant. And I think this is so important because for a couple of reasons. Number one, just having clear communication is a big deal. This is an important relationship. And often the landlord-tenant relationship can be kind of stereotyped as being contentious. And, it's just kind of a battle between, I'm trying to get this and you're trying to get this, and this is a legal agreement. And certainly it is in some cases. There's some really bad actor landlords and some really bad actor tenants who kind of create that tension. But if you have good communication up front, it doesn't mean you have to be best friends with each other, but you can have some respect and some trust about this relationship, some respect about getting on the same page and understanding, and then being very clear about some responsibilities of what you have to do as a tenant and as a landlord and what the consequences are. And so that's really what this is a 30 to 60 minute conversation where you, yes, have the lease document and some of the paperwork you need to sign, but really just having human connection. Because have you ever found when you sign an insurance document or a legal contract, how understandable is that for most people? It's not. Like, you have to highlight some of the important things and put it in human terms, not legalese, for them to understand what is going on. So I'm going to summarize real quickly my understanding of what a rent talk would look like, kind of my interpretation of it. Kind of three different categories. Responsibilities, having a conversation with a tenant about their responsibilities and things they need to think about. Also explaining some of your procedures as a landlord, what your business, what they need to know, and then talking about some opportunities, some benefits they might be able to get if they want to pay attention. So let's talk about tenant responsibilities. So of course, there's things like paying the rent. You have to pay the rent, but when do you have to pay the rent? When's it late? What's the consequence of that? That's a conversation there. In many single family houses that I have, there's more privileges by owning a single family or renting a single family house. You have a yard, you have this space, as opposed to like renting an apartment, but there's also responsibilities. You might have to do the yard. You might have to clean things up. The responsibilities with the property. So talking about what you expect them to do, what their responsibility is from a maintenance standpoint. And then there's also just house rules. We have a lot of student rentals. And so there's just house rules. We've had to get as detailed as like, do not chop the trees with hatchets around the apartment. Kind of silly, right? But these are college students. So there might be house rules about burning things or things that they might not know, shooting off firearms in the yard. How do we know all this stuff from college student rentals? But rules and going over those is really important. Then also talk about the consequences. The most obvious one is if you don't pay your rent, then there are legal consequences to doing that. But you can also talk about, hey, this could hurt your credit. Hey, if you get an eviction on your credit report or on your record, it's going to be harder for you to rent the next place. Or here are some penalties that might happen. So there are real consequences of doing that. That's not to say we're going to abuse that privilege. You're going to be a responsible landlord, but there have to be consequences that have to be clear about what that is. And then there's either suggestions or maybe even requirements you can make, like having renter's insurance. We don't currently require this on all our properties. I'm thinking that'd be a good idea. I know a lot of landlords do, but having renter's insurance is very beneficial to the tenant and also to the landlord. And then having an emergency fund, not something you can require, but wouldn't it make their life better if you could suggest and even train them or give them some ideas, buy them a book on how to have some personal finance kind of essentials like having an emergency fund. That's making their life better, but also it's going to give them some cushion if they have some problems, which always happen with everybody. Your car breaks down, you got a little bit of money, extra money. So those are just kind of tenant conversations about responsibilities, consequences. It's also helpful to explain your processes. What do they need to do to pay the rent? Where online can they do that? What's the portal? If you have a portal they have to log into, what's that look like? Help them do that. Maintenance requests. If they have a maintenance request, how do they do that? Typically, you want them to submit that in writing, so you have it there. But what process do they have to go through? When is it appropriate? When is it the tenant's responsibility? And when is it the landlord's responsibility to do repairs? The heating and air goes out. Okay, we need to fix that. That's the landlord's responsibility. A leak in the roof. All right, we need to fix that. But there might be tenant caused repairs where things have a longer lifespan than they should. The door handle came off. How come that door handle came off? How come there's a hole in the door? How come that window is broken? So which repairs are whose? That's a big point of contention with landlords and tenants, discussing that, having a checklist when they move in, how we're going to tell when you move out, what was the condition was before and after. Those are conversations to have. And then finally, one thing I really liked about Mike that I learned from his is treating the rental business as a retention business. This is a customer service business. Like, you are on the same page with your tenant. The best consequence of a landlord-tenant relationship is a tenant stays for a long time for a landlord, and often for the tenant too, so they have a stable place to live. So talk about renewal discounts or upgrades. This isn't something I've implemented in our student rentals because those turn over every couple of years, but I think it's a really good idea for long-term rentals. If somebody stays for 2 years and they're getting ready to think about renewing for the third year, maybe you give them a 10% rent discount, or maybe you have an upgrade that you do to kind of show them you appreciate them renewing. It's a great idea. It would cost you some in the short run, but benefit you a ton in the long run because you don't have turnover and cost and having to get a new tenant in there. I also like to think about, we used to do a lot of turning tenants into homeowners. So we would talk about, hey, do you want help becoming a homeowner? Maybe we're willing to sell this house. Maybe you're not, but we often sold our houses to our tenants, sometimes just helping them get a loan and get qualified. Other times, even owner financing the property to them. I love that aspect of the business. It's not for every landlord. You might be keeping this property, but if you also have your real estate license or you have a relationship with a realtor, instead of losing them to someone else to go buy a house, you could help them buy a house and kind of have a pipeline to help them do that. So all of these are opportunities. There's even more you could talk about. You could talk about how do you present this? Is it on a little formal presentation? The main point I wanted to give you in this episode was to actually have a rent talk. Don't just let this thing go by fast and say this virtually send and sign. Take this as an opportunity to connect with your tenant on a human-to-human level, to build respect, if not even trust, between each other, to kind of flip that landlord-tenant relationship on its head, that stereotype, and then have an honest conversation about responsibilities, consequences, opportunities. This can make your long-term relationship with your tenant both ways be much better. The Rent Talk is one of many, many rental systems that we can all improve as landlords. And it's actually something I spend a lot of time thinking about, teaching, and coaching inside of a private community I have called Rental Property Mastery, also known as RPM. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we finished up what's called a rental property sprint. Our sprints are something we regularly do inside of RPM, where it's kind of like a very short course, but we focus on implementation. So in this case, we had 12 different rental systems that we worked on implementing, including bookkeeping, including tenant screening, and many others. So by the end of the 3 or 4 weeks of the sprint, you have those systems implemented and you've improved your business tangibly as a rental investor. And that's really what Rental Property Mastery is all about. It's one part education, but also a lot of implementation and doing it alongside a community of people who are fellow small and mighty real estate investors and also coaches. So I do a lot of coaching one-on-one and help give you tips and support. And we have accountability groups, and which we call action teams. So if that's something you're interested in, you can check out Rental Property Mastery at coachcarson.com/RPM. There is an application process. And the reason we do that, we only have 300 members max inside the community. So we want to make sure it's a good fit for you and you're a good fit for the community, that you already have at least a couple properties, 1 or 2 properties under your belt. So it's more of an intermediate to advanced community instead of just for beginners. Although in the future, we hope to do more stuff for beginners. So if that is you and you're interested in that and you want to join the community, go to coachcarson.com/RPM. We'd love to hear from you and have you in the community. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks a lot for listening today.